This morning, we're continuing our journey through the book of Daniel, and this is no pun. My name is Daniel, if I haven't met you yet. I get to serve as one of the pastors here at Awaken, and let me just say, this morning, what a reminder of a testament of God's goodness when I look at our seniors, and I think back to some of those days when we didn't have any seniors or any kids just in general, and so super grateful, super humble for the opportunity to be up here, present the word with you this morning. And so really, we're just going to dive in. I do have to say on the front end, please excuse my voice. I don't know what happened. I woke up yesterday, and I had like a sore throat, and my head was all stuffy. And so if I sound like I should have taken some more cold medicine, I apologize. But we're going to get through it together. And so as we hop in today, I want to tell you a deep, dark thing about me. One of my greatest fears. One of my greatest fears is flying. I'm scared to fly on a plane. As a matter of fact, it took me over 20 years to actually get into a plane. I was a sophomore in college, and my cousin was getting married, and so I had to eventually get on a plane. I'm terrified of flying in planes. And honestly, like I have flown several times, but I try to keep like the time down to like 3 hours or less, because I can get through 3 hours. Like that's either like a movie or in a playlist. Like I'll be fine. And so really, I do not like flying. And honestly, I don't like flying because I've probably seen way too many movies or TV shows where bad things happen on flights. And as a matter of fact, not that long ago, maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was flying into Miami, Florida, and all of my worst dreams were coming true. I was flying into Miami, Florida, and if you ever flown into Miami, it's like raining 95% of the time. And so I'm flying into Miami, and as we are entering into Miami, everything is happening. Like the turbulence is crazy, like stuff is like falling out of the ceiling. Like, it's real bad whenever like the flight attendants are like, buckled in. So they were like buckled in and like nobody's moving. And I'm freaking out. I'm by myself. I didn't have my wife there. It was just me. And so like my worship playlist was like full blast. I had like my headphones in. Like I was really just trying to hang on. I'm like squeezing the seat. This whole time while this is happening, I have two little girls sitting right in front of me. Like maybe 7 years old, 8 years old. I got two little girls sitting right in front of me who are also traveling by themselves. I see no adult around them. Unlike me though, they are having the time of their life. They are like it's a roller coaster, like hands up, screeching, like having the best time. So just picture this grown man sitting behind these two little girls who are having the time of their life, laughing, having a great time, and me gripping the seat. You can see like all my knuckles were white, like I was freaking out, right? This is like my worst nightmare. Now, obviously, like nothing bad happened because I'm here, and so like we landed and we were fine. But really, this moment made me unpack like the real reason why I don't like flying, and it's because I am not in control. Right? I don't like flying because I am not in control. Like think about it, when you hop on a plane, you have to put a lot of trust into the maintenance, the guys who upkeep the plane, that make sure everything is good and ready to go. You got to put a lot of trust into the pilot to make sure that he's like awake or like they're ready to fly the plane. They know where they're going. They know what levels they have to be in. You got to trust people like, shout out to Ruth and Kurt, people like up in the tower who are telling the planes, they're actually probably doing the most work, telling the planes like, hey, this is where you come in and go out, all that good stuff. Like there's a lot of trust having to happen in order to make the plane ride successful. A lot of trust. Trusting in something or someone other than yourself is scary. And now you may think like that's a pretty outrageous fear, like bro, that like the plane crashes don't really happen all that often. But I want you to think about maybe perhaps some of your greatest fears as well. All right? So my seniors that are graduating, maybe you have a little bit of fear moving to a new town, going to a new school, having to make new friends. Like those are all things that can be a little scary. Certain people in this room today that maybe are a little bit too scared of flying insects, bees, things like that, crickets, that kind of stuff. You're scared of them because you're depending on an insect to do what it's supposed to do. Like that's a little scary. Like you don't have any control over that. Right? Others in the room today are thinking through their relationships, and maybe those are a little rocky. Like maybe you're not in the place you thought you would be with that certain someone, or maybe there's nobody at all. Like that's scary. Because there's a big unknown there, and you can't do it by yourself. Others in the room today struggle with success or lack thereof. Like you just want to prove that you're worth it. And so you work long hours and you step on people and you make the social climb and you keep climbing because no matter what you do, you're scared that in the end, it's not going to be enough. Every single one of these fears is rooted in the exact same thing. They stem from a lack of trust. A lack of trust in someone or something to do what you thought they would or they should do. Worry leads to fear, and that fear builds to anxiety. And nobody is at their best when they're actually run by anxiety. There's a simple definition for this that I got from one of the dopest rappers that I can think of. Andy Mineo says this when he talks about anxiety. He says, anxiety is fear mixed with control, because when you can't control something, all that's left to do is rage. Anxiety is fear mixed with control, because when you can't control something, all that's left to do is rage. You see, worry happens in life. Moments in life happen when things show up on your doorstep that cause us worry and fear and anxiety. And so this morning, what I want to talk to you is actually about shifting the view. Instead of living life like I was on that plane, gripping the plane seat, instead of worrying, instead choosing to live in peace because of where you're putting your trust. Instead of being defined by your worries, instead of letting fear dictate your answers, you instead choose how to respond when those situations show up. Because we all know those situations do show up. So let's pray before we hop into Daniel chapter 2. Dear God, thank you for today. God, would you use me to speak today what you have for us to hear. So God, we love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so today, Daniel chapter 2 is a pretty big chapter, and so I'm going to do something a little bit different. So here I'm going to read a pretty big chunk on the front end, but I'm actually going to use the Message translation because it's a pretty good paraphrase. And so I know most of you didn't bring your hard copy of the Message into church today, and so what I did is I actually put the verses up on the screen behind me. So what we're going to do is we're going to read a big chunk here at the beginning so that you have the full story and what's happening. And then as we go back through, I'll go back to our ESV translation to pull some of those things out, okay? So don't be confused if you look up on the screen because it's not the ESV, but it's the Message, okay? And so I'm going to read this, and I kind of want you to kind of just picture this story that's unpacking here, that's unfolding here. So Daniel chapter 2, starting in verse 1. In the second year of his reign, King Nebuchadnezzar started having dreams that disturbed him deeply. He couldn't sleep. He called in all the Babylonian magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and fortune tellers to interpret his dreams for him. When they came and lined up before the king, he said to them, I had a dream that I can't get out of my mind, and I can't sleep until I know what it means. The fortune teller, speaking in an Aramaic language, said, Long live the king. Tell us the dream, and we will interpret it. The king answered the fortune tellers, This is my decree. If you can't tell me both the dream itself and the interpretation, I'll have you ripped to pieces, limb to limb, and your homes torn down. But if you tell both the dream and its interpretation, I'll lavish you with gifts and honors. So go to it. Tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered, If it pleases your majesty, just tell us the dream. We'll give you the interpretation. But the king said, I know what you're up to. You're just playing for time. You know you're cornered. You know that if you can't tell me my dream, then you're out and doomed. I see right through you. You're going to slap together some fancy story and confuse the issue until I change my mind. No way. First tell me the dream and so I'll know that you're on the up and up, and with the interpretation and not just blowing smoke in my eyes. The fortune teller said, Nobody can do what you ask, and no king, great or small, has ever demanded anything like this from any magician, enchanter, fortune teller. What you're asking is impossible unless some god or goddess should reveal it. And they don't hang around with people like us. Well, that set the king off. He lost his temper and ordered the whole company of Babylonian wise men killed. And when this death warrant was issued, Daniel and his companions were included. They were also marked for execution. All right, so you have to see what is going on here. We have this anxiety-inducing situation, and King Nebuchadnezzar is struggling big time. He's having these dreams that he can't understand. He's having these anxiety, panic attacks over big questions of things like his future, his security, his wealth, his retirement, his family lineage, all these things that none of us can relate to. See, don't miss this. Daniel, the main character of the story, is also thrown into a pretty big anxiety-riddled situation, like death. Like, it's a pretty big deal. Death because of other people. Like, Daniel didn't even get a chance to speak before he was sentenced to death. This is a pretty wild story. You want to talk about a situation that had nothing to do with Daniel, and yet he has to face it. It's in this moment. I can assure you that there was some worry or some fear that was creeping in to those cabins. Those people that are in these wise Babylonians, there's some fear and some anxiety and some worry. And what's crazy about this is thousands of years later, we still get anxious about some of the same stuff. Whether it's King Nebuchadnezzar thinking about all of these things like his future and his security and his wealth and retirement and family lineage, so on and so on, we think and get anxious about the same stuff. And there's worry here because there's a lack of control. Fear is present because there is unrest about what lies ahead. Anxiety is built in because nobody can actually explain what is happening. And then we see Daniel, who is literally being sent to death at work for something that he didn't even do. Worry, fear, and anxiety are right here on the front page. And if you read your Bible much, you will see that worry, fear, and anxiety actually comes up a lot, again and again. But why do we think that is? Because our human condition is to worry. Our human condition is to worry so much that we fall into this cycle of anxiety. We, me included, every one of us in this room has to deal with some level of worry, some fear about the future. And maybe if we're honest, some of us have anxiety. But I want you to know, as we read through the beginning of Daniel chapter 2, that there's a lot more to this story. The story doesn't end there. See, anxiety is fear mixed with control. Because when you can't control, you rage. See, and as we continue into this journey, we have to understand that worry isn't the mode that we were meant to live in. Yet so often, if we're honest with ourselves, worry is actually what dictates our actions. Both King Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel here in Daniel chapter 2 were faced with situations where fear can drive decisions. Worry can cloud judgment and anxiety can cripple, yet both men showed very different answers to their situations. This is really where I want to camp out for a little bit today. I want you to see that one had a reaction that was very quick, and the other had a very thought-given response. Right? One was a very quick reaction, and the other was a thought-given response. I read this definition this week. It said, reacting is an instinctive, emotional response to a situation. It's often impulsive and can be influenced by our past experiences or fears. On the other hand, responding is a thoughtful and deliberate action. It involves considering the situation, weighing the options, and making a conscious decision. So as we hear the difference between reacting and responding, I want to ask you a question. What's your go-to answer when you have anxiety show up? When life turns up and it's not exactly like you thought, where you're no longer in control, when worry begins to take over your mind and fear creeps into your thought process, what is your go-to answer? So what I want to do is we're going to actually compare these side by side, and then I'm going to ask you that question again. So side by side, we're going to look at these first, starting with reaction. See, King Nebuchadnezzar reacts to his worry and his anxiety in perhaps not the healthiest way. In verses 5 through 15 in Daniel chapter 2, we are told of his responses. In verse 5, he's threatening to kill and destroy violently those that can't answer his demands. He's demeaning those in his circle, and he is teetering into the delusional. The fact that he wants his answers in that very moment, aside from the fact that he's not even telling them his dream, we would tend to think he's falling into that delusional trap. And toward the end of these verses, in verse 12, he is so angry that he extends his violent threats to every wise man. So the best way that I could sum up this reaction, his reaction to the worry, the fear, and the anxiety are 3 words: delusional, destructive, and despicable. Now, it's easy for us to see his response and point fingers, but I think if we took a moment and thought about our go-to response, maybe we're a little more similar than we'd want to admit. Right? When we experience fear, when our plans get off track, when we have questions about our future, what's our go-to response? I know sometimes I can fall into that trap of being delusional or destructive or despicable. So let's look at the other side of this response. Let's look at Daniel's answer. See, he is not reacting to his circumstances, but instead he is taking a moment to process and then to respond. He is responding instead of reacting. So check out verses 14 through 18. Daniel responds to the king in a calm manner, asking for a little clarity. And don't miss this, in verse 14, he sets up a time to actually come back to the matter. And that's a little extra side note. You see, we can't just push our fears and our worries and our anxieties away and just don't worry about them. You have to actually come back and face them. See, as we move into verse 17, we see that he presses into community. He goes to his community with all of his worries and his fears, and he and his community, they humbly approach the throne of God to seek wisdom and to get answers. And perhaps at the height of worry and anxiety, Daniel goes back to the king in verse 24, and in a moment of bravery, he reports back to him what God had told him. So I think we could summarize Daniel's response to fear, worry, and anxiety in 3 words: cool, calm, and collected. Cool, calm, and collected. Now, you see the 2 comparisons. You see King Nebuchadnezzar and you see Daniel. And so I have to ask you the question again: what is your go-to response? Are you quick to just react, or are you slow to respond? When worry, when fear, when anxiety shows up on your doorstep, what do you choose? So here at Awaken, we like to make the spiritual practical. And so this is where we're going to get into our practical pieces here. We're going to get a little practical for you guys, okay? So I don't want you to miss here. This is an interesting story. We're seeing the response. We're seeing the reaction. But what does this actually have to do with me? How do I go and I take this and I apply it into my life? So I believe that here in Daniel chapter 2, we have a guide. That even in the face of death, we have a guide on how to respond in trust instead of reacting in fear. It's pretty simple, really. I'm going to give it to you in 3 P's. All right, so you got 3 P's. Pray with a party, praise no matter, and point back glory to God. I think these 3 P's are the practical response when fear, worry, and anxiety show up on our doorstep. First, I want you to notice in Daniel chapter 2, verse 17 and 18, that we find Daniel going and praying with a party. It says this: Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. And he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. You see, Daniel was a walking billboard for when life gets difficult and life gets tough, that he turned to his good Christian community. Daniel was showing us the importance of being vulnerable in this setting. But you don't just show up on day 1 and get to be vulnerable. What this shows is that Daniel invested time and effort to be real. And because he did that, he could go to them with these big worries, these big situations, and they could pray hard together. This is important. So oftentimes our reaction when life gets really hard and we have worry and anxiety is that we pull away. Is that we remove ourselves actually from the Christian community. And what here we see is that Daniel pressed in. He didn't run away when life got hard. Instead, he goes to his group and they begin to pray. Next, what I want you to see is that no matter what the outcome was, is that he was going to praise. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 20, we have insight to the prayers of Daniel. It says, Daniel answered and he said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and he changes seasons. He removes kings and he sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and I give praise. I mean, you have to think about the journey that Daniel has been on. If you were here with us last week, Pastor John walked us through the beginning of Daniel chapter 1. You realize that Daniel at a young age was ripped out of his hometown and thrown into a land where people didn't like him. He was shipped away to this foreign land where his faith was a total different setting than the culture that he was placed into. If you were with us last week, we talked, about, hey, he even went and he was told, hey, you got to eat this way, you got to act this way. And he went up against authority saying, hey, this is not what God has for me. He was eating his vegetables and he was being tested. And here in chapter 2, he was threatened with death. And I think what you see from the story of Daniel just in the first 2 chapters is that the highs and the lows, the wins and the losses, no matter what, Daniel always turned and gave praise back to God. No matter the outcome of the situation that he was in, he praised God. So first he prays with the party. Next, he praises no matter. And lastly, he points back to God. In Daniel 2, verse 27 through 30, check out his response when the king seeks an answer. Daniel answered the king and he said, no wise man, no enchanter, no magician or astrologer can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. You see, this is a moment where Daniel actually has the answer. He has the one thing that the king in the territory wanted. He wanted to know what his dream was, and he wanted to know the interpretation, and Daniel had the answer. And in this moment, he could have been tempted to take that glory for himself. But instead, even in this, he took the glory off of himself, and he put it onto God. What a humble moment here. Daniel is saying, look, I couldn't have done this at all, but God could. That phrase, I can't, but God can, echoes through the chapters of Daniel. I can't, but God can is a really loaded expression. I can't, but God can moves the control from Daniel to the only one who actually could do it. I can't, but God can puts Daniel's faith on display in a place that had nothing. They wanted nothing to do with God. I can't, but God can puts God in the front, and all of the glory goes to him. So really, as we talk about these practical things, you want a place to start dealing with fears, worries, and anxieties. It always has been and it always will be, starting at the feet of Jesus. You see, King Nebuchadnezzar, he wanted his dream to be interpreted. He wanted to hear about his worldly kingdom and how big it would get and how much authority he would have and how much influence he would carry. And even in this moment, even in this toxic power trip that King Nebuchadnezzar is going through, the interpretation points to God getting all the glory. What you saw, O king, was a huge statue standing before you, striking in appearance and terrifying. And as you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and it broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of a summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and it filled the whole earth. Right, so Daniel is actually saying something even here in interpreting this dream. And actually, I couldn't think of a better time in our climate, in our political climate that we're in as we head into an election year, that we need to hear this as well. No matter what world powers are at play, God is in control. He always has been, and he always will be. Even in this dream interpretation with all the world cultures, they couldn't stand to the kingdom of God. You see, he is above all, he is before all, and his kingdom knows no end. These worldly kingdoms in this dream, they will rise, but ultimately they will fall. But God will remain. You see, Daniel is secure in his trust. He's secure in his trust of God because he knows the truth. Worry, fear, anxiety, those things don't get the last word in this story. The last word belongs to the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, because God is on the throne. And there's nothing that we as humans, no matter the power of the worldly kingdom that we fall under, that could stop the heavenly kingdom. It's really funny when you think back to my fear with airplanes. Like, do I really want control of that airplane? Absolutely not. And if you're sitting with me, you definitely don't want me to have control of that airplane either. I have no resume, I have no skills, I have no training, I have nothing that would put me in that cockpit with any chance of actually flying that plane. And it's funny when we think about it that way because it stems from a lack of control. Yet so often in our own lives, we do the same thing. Our own lives we look at as like, hey, I want to be in control when we have no resume, when we have no skills or training that puts us in control of our own life. God is in control. We really don't want to be. God has always been, and he is, and he always will be, and his resume is unmatched. And see, if you've been in church for any amount of time, you've probably heard things like this before. You've heard things like you have to surrender, you have to give him control, his way is better. So then why do we always go back? Why do we always go back to worry, go back to fear, and give in to anxiety? Because our human nature is to go back to us being in control. We want to pilot our own plane like somehow we were actually equipped to do that. That's not your weight to carry. That's not your responsibility. That's not your load to bear. You see, we let logic run our brain and we carry the worries like we can somehow fix them ourselves. So if you're here today and you feel like you're bound up by worry and by fear and you're stressed and you're anxious, I would encourage you just to lay those things down. So I got Aaron, if you would, go ahead and bring that up here to me. I got a little illustration. So as I was prepping this week, I saw this really incredible illustration that made my mind, it clicked for me. Thanks, man. So I have this illustration for you. So oftentimes when we come into church, we come in carrying a pretty big box full of worries. And I don't know what those worries are for you, but you think about it. We come into the box, we come in carrying our box full of worries. We got things like, I'm moving from this city or that city. I've got this big evaluation at work coming up. I know I have to have this conversation with this one family member or this one person that I really don't want to have, but I know I need to, so I'm going to put that worry in the box. I've got this bill that I know I have to pay. It's coming down the line. I'm going to put that worry in the box. I still don't have that job or a job. I'm going to put that worry in the box. I'm still single. I'm going to put that worry in the box. Right? We have a lot of worries that we bring in, that we carry in our boxes. A lot of worries. Right? These worries, these are the ones that keep you up at night. These are the ones that cause you to be anxious. But you know what? In a moment, you come to church and you hear a message when you hear Jesus saying, hey, trade me your burdens. My way is easy, my burdens are light. Right? We hear those things and we hear about this great exchange that Jesus did for us. And we say, you know what? Okay, cool. I got my little God box here. I'm just going to take my worries. I'm going to put that one in there. Oh, my singleness, I'm going to put it and I'm going to give it to you, God. Oh, my job, I'm going to take that. I'm going to give it to you, God. My moving, I'm going to take that. I'm going to give it to you. My new friend group, I'm going to put that in there for you, God. All right, we begin to take our worries one by one and we put them at the feet of Jesus. And we say, God, I give it to you. Take it. Do what you need to do. Do what you need to do. And then once you know it, we give it a couple days, we give it a couple weeks. As we're laying in bed, those worries begin to creep back in. And you say, you know what, God, I prayed for that for 2 whole days. I prayed for that for a whole week, a whole month, a whole year. I prayed for it. And obviously you can't handle it. So you know what? I'm going to take it back. And so we take it and we put it back into our worry box. And we take it and we put it back into our worry box. Because God, maybe you're too busy. I don't know what it is. I've been praying and nothing's happening. Anybody else ever felt this? I know I have. Why do we do this? In the middle of the night, we begin to say, God, you know what? You just can't handle it. I got it. This is where it all began to make sense. Because so often our worry box is so big and our God box is so small. When actually, if you just figured out that God is actually bigger than any of the worries you could carry, you could dump every single worry in there and God would still be bigger. And not even that. You can not only cast all of your worries, all of your fears, all of your anxieties, you put your whole life in that box. You say, God, I'm giving you everything. I'm putting my full trust in you. I don't have to worry about these things because you said you've already taken it. Right, 1 Peter tells us to cast all of your anxieties on him because he cares for you. So honestly, I think we have to just ask ourselves, don't we think it's just time to get a bigger God? He's God of the universe. He's big enough for any of your worries, any of your fears, any of your anxieties, but you have to trust in him. See, the story of Daniel shows us how to tackle worry, fear, and anxiety. Because Daniel wasn't just bringing those worries, those fears, those anxieties. He was taking his entire life. He was taking all of his being. He was taking everything to God, and he says, here, this is yours. So as I invite the band back up, I just want us to think about this. Daniel chooses to respond in trust. Daniel chose to respond in trust, and not like some halfway trust where, hey, I put the worries in the box, then I'm going to take them out because I think I know better. Like Daniel puts full trust into the only one, God, who can carry him in the highs and the lows. You see, Daniel's hope for that day, Daniel's hope for that season, Daniel's hope for his everything didn't waver whenever there was worries or fears that showed up. Because his full trust wasn't in himself. Daniel wasn't looking to control everything about his life. He was resting his hope. He was resting his trust in Jesus. And so if you're here today and you're like, you know what, I have these fears, I have these worries, I have these anxieties, I want you to know that you can make the same choice that Daniel makes. You can make the same choice that say, you know what, fear doesn't get to win. Worry doesn't get to dictate my day. And anxiety doesn't get to keep holding me down. Because if we're honest, we know that we don't always get to control our circumstances. We don't get to control our situations. And no matter how much control you might think that you have, you don't. But you do get the choice on how you respond. You do get the choice that you do get to respond instead of just react. See, God had a plan. He has a plan, and it couldn't be stopped by any of the major world powers at play. Jesus made the great exchange that you don't have to carry the worries and the fears and the anxieties anymore. But it does take a full surrender. You can't be halfway in and halfway out. You've got to say, God, I can't do this, but you can. So really today, the invitation is simple. We're going to have some of our pastors and prayer team in the back. And really, if you just came in here with some anxieties, some fears, some worries, they want to be back there to pray with you. That was the first step, right? Daniel went to pray with community. That's what we are. We're a community. So we're here to pray for you. If you're here and you're sitting here and you're like, man, no wonder I have worries and fears and anxieties because I've never actually put my full trust in God. Well, they would love to talk with you about that as well. So my encouragement is as the next song plays, if you need prayer, go get it. Go press into the community of people that are ready to pray with you. You don't have to carry this by yourself. God, I can't do this.